Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Reto Meyer. I am a member of the Android Developer Relations team, and welcome to the first ever episode of DevBytes Backstage. I'm joined today by Chet Haas, DevByte author extraordinaire, and we are here today to answer your questions about animations. So if you have a question that you would like to ask Chet, you can either join us live via Hangout, which you can find the link to if you go to the Google Plus event page, or you can type your question directly into the comment stream on the event page or on YouTube. While we wait for you guys to answer your question or ask us your questions, we have a few prepared from people who have asked before we got started, and I think we'd like to find out a little bit more about Chet as well. So if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do in the Android team.
I am an engineer on the framework team, which is the team that brings you things like application lifecycle, the UI toolkit, graphics, activities, all that kind of good stuff. Specifically, I work on graphics and animation stuff, so I sort of wear different hats at different times. I have done a fair amount of work on animations. I also help out with the GPU acceleration and general UI graphics goodies.
Very nice. Excellent. All right, so let's get started. Our first question is from Andrew Hughes from San Luis Obispo in California. He asks that let's say you have a view group that is added directly to the window manager, such as a pop-up, and a child view's layout changes size, causing the entire pop-up view to change size. How would you animate the view group's size change? He's watched the DevBytes on layout transitions, and he's tried to set the layout transition using the transition layout.changing on the view group that's added to the window manager. This causes the child view whose size changed to animate to the new size, but the parent view group just jumps to the new size without animating.
Yeah, so the way that I think about layout transition is it's really good at doing very specific things, and sometimes you fall outside of the bounds of what those specific things are, and you, Andrew, have just done so. The problem is that view group does not have a parent in your situation, and what you really need to do is set a layout transition on the parent of the children or of the view hierarchy that you want to automatically animate. So if there was a way to have a parent there, then you would set the layout transition on that instead. If not, it's up to you. You could use similar techniques to animate the bounds of the view group, although you're actually resizing a window, so you're probably down to doing expensive things like actually changing, I don't know, window manager layout params to actually resize the window, which is going to be kind of costly. You may instead do something different, like actually pop up a window that is of the correct size, but you're animating over a transparent area and sort of faking out what it looks like to the user. There's another technique that we demonstrated at I/O and that will be coming out as a DevByte soon. Wait a minute, no, it came out 2 weeks ago.
There you go.
Called activity animations, which is about launching activities with transparent backgrounds to sort of fake out the fact that the activity is there, but we're going to animate into it. Maybe you could do something like that in this situation, to basically not have it at the full size when it begins, but then sort of animate the size you want. I don't know specifically about your situation, but I would say that layout transition is probably not going to solve that problem for that top level view group that's in the window, so you're going to need to figure out something else that will.
Thank you. Good answer. So I'm going to rely on Daniel to let us know when someone in the Hangout is ready to ask a question. So if you are joining us via Hangout, do be sure to type into the chat bar within the Hangout that you are ready for a question, because we often get people who just want to join Hangouts because it's more fun that way. So if you do actually have a question to ask, please do let Daniel know and he will put you up on screen. In the meantime, Moritz Post from Germany wants to know, what would you use to do sort of Gaussian blur effects within an application? Is RenderScript still something that can be used for that?
Yes, in fact. There was a portion of RenderScript specifically around doing actual display graphics that was deprecated, and that is no longer the way that RenderScript is going. However, RenderScript has another important component that is having a lot of work done and a lot of important performance-related advantages, which is the ability to do image processing. So it can use GPU as well as CPU resources, multi-core processing. You get sort of all the advantages of all the compute power that the device has using render scripts and doing inherently multi-threaded algorithms on it. So for instance, you could do a Gaussian blur using render scripts using these primitives in the non-deprecated part of render scripts to get excellent performance for doing things like this. There are other ways to get Gaussian blur, but that's probably so I would say what you want to do is probably end up in the highest performance area, which means you're basically going to be using RenderScript if you want to stay at that level, or OpenGL as well if you want to do things a little bit more manually. RenderScript might be a little bit easier. It might also allow you to stay within the SDK level that you're more comfortable with. But I don't know, it's worth checking out. It isn't possibly an expensive computation to perform at runtime, so it does seem worth checking out RenderScript to get the best performance you can.
Very nice. Everyone loves Gaussian blur effects over things, so it's a good question. Let's have a look. Emil Scholander says that you and Roman mentioned a custom view with a code-generated drop shadow in one of your talks, presumably at I/O this year?
Yep.
So he'd love to know the best way to achieve this, both with performance in mind and the fact that a drop shadow will often want to be drawn outside of the view's clipping rectangle. It would be very annoying to take the drop shadow into account when doing the layout. Also, how do you handle this drop shadow for non-square views?
So there's a couple of different pieces of information there. First of all, you might want to check out the DevByte that came out again a couple of weeks ago called Activity Animations, because that had a simple layout in the back of it that would allow the objects inside the container to cast their own shadow. So in that case, we didn't have a clipping problem because it was the container itself that was actually drawing the shadows behind the views. So it would basically iterate through the children whenever it needed to draw itself and say, where are you now? I'm going to draw the shadow there. And then it also had a couple of properties that allowed you to vary what we called the shadow distance, which created an offset as well as a blur around that to simulate the action of the view being closer or further from the actual surface that it was projecting the shadow onto. There are different ways to achieve this effect. The one that we used in that particular activity was to render a rounded rectangle into a bitmap and blur that operation in the bitmap itself. And then when we drew the bitmap, it was going to be naturally blurred, especially around the edges, which is what you care about. For rounded shapes, or non-rectangular views, we just drew a flat-out round rectangle because that was the effect that we want. If you have a specific shape in mind that you want to use, I believe the technique that I heard of that you could use instead is to create a bitmap that's I think it's an alpha 8 bitmap, and the details are escaping me, but you should be able to get a similar blur effect there. To get the effect that you need with the shape that you actually want to draw instead of the simple rounded rect that we were using there. But go ahead and check out the DevByte as well as the code that goes with it. You can at least see what we were doing for the I/O example, which is maybe a starting place for you.
Very nice. Do we have anyone on the Hangout who would like to ask a question, Daniel?
Not at the moment.
Not quite?
I'm asking away, but no one seems interested yet.
By all means, take this advantage. I'm going to go through a few more questions which we've pre-screened. Once we're out of questions, we're going to stop talking. So if you do have anything that you'd like to ask Chet about animations, now is a fantastic opportunity.
We may be forced to sing a song if there are no questions. It's
did
not
we
a threat.
Did we bring Dan Galpin? He's my song proxy. Whenever there's a need to break out to song or dance, I get Dan Galpin in the room.
Does that clear the room, or is it a good thing?
Well, I don't know. I leave, so I have no idea what happens from that point onwards. In the meantime, Andrew Moore from Leeds has managed to avoid us having to break into a musical number quite yet. He wants to know how you would go about creating the animation effect that's being used more and more in Google's own apps, such as the one in Currents, in the list/grid view, to slide in the item at the bottom of the list elegantly.
Yeah, so this question actually confused me, and then I realized that we hadn't actually played the DevBytes before the question was asked, and now we've done that because we were unable to have this Q&A period last week. So I would suggest you go back and actually watch the DevBytes that we posted last Friday, which was called List View removal animations. I can't
There's a few deletion animations, if I recall correctly.
So that one specifically did a very simple swipe maneuver. It was not, I'll get back to that in a second. It wasn't probably what you'd want to do in real apps, but it was good enough for the demo app. But then after it was swiped out, it would animate the items around it to close the gap. The nuance there is the swipe animation used a very simple heuristic that said, move it under your finger, and then if it's gone past a certain amount, then simply animate it away very quickly. What you actually want to do in real applications, and what we do in the Google applications like Gmail, is to use velocity tracker to figure out how fast the finger was moving when they let go. And if it's moving under a certain speed, then we'll actually snap it back based on that information. Otherwise, we'll animate it off the screen based on the velocity that the finger was moving at. That's a little bit more effective. It gives the user a little bit better connected feeling to the application because it's behaving in a much more WYSIWYG manner than the simple demo that we had. But you can at least see the mechanics of actually animating the item out or back in and then animating the gap closed, which was the real intent of that demo.
So that's interesting. So it's actually more intuitive for people using an app to base it on velocity of finger movement rather than on the distance which you're transitioning the object off the screen.
Well, it was very easy for me to base it on distance.
Yes.
I would think it's not that much harder to use velocity instead, especially since we have velocity tracker as a public class that you can get a hold of. It's going to be a little bit more work, which is why I didn't bother to do it for the purposes of this demo, because that's not where I was focusing. But it's not that big a deal, and more importantly, it's the user experience that you want in that sliding application.
Very nice. Okay, let's have a look. So I don't know who asked this question, but in the new Hangout app, some people really like the way that new messages animate in
Isn't that
from
nice?
the input to the chat history. And even more importantly, how the previous messages animate up to make room. How would you go about creating a sequence of animations like that?
That is tricky from a couple of different angles. I'll cover them. I don't have a pat answer for you because it depends on the situation. One of the reasons is, imagine this. Imagine that you're typing text into an edit text with a certain font size, and then you want to place it as just a text view, a non-editable text view in the chat window as it scrolls up the screen. Well, does that have the same font size, and what's the text going to look like in that view, and how does that compare to how the text looks like in the edit text? So how do you actually animate from one view that is completely different into another view with the same text but maybe different text characteristics, or at least different text measurement because it's not exactly like the edit text? So there's some tricky nuances there about even if you have the same size text, you want to make sure that you're actually going to animate it from and to the correct locations in these completely different view and layout situations. So assuming that you can actually solve that problem, or that you're actually animating the same kind of view, or you can fake it out well enough, or you can crossfade between them. The other element here is to have the ability to basically do a flyover of views. What you want to do is move a view from one container to another, or at least the facsimile of a view. One important thing to note in graphics and animation is it's not necessarily it's not always necessary to do the right thing, as long as you do the thing that looks good. Right? So in this case, do you actually need to fly a text view, or is it good enough to simply fly a graphical representation of the text? And you can actually do either one. If you want to fly just a bitmap of the text, you can snapshot whatever it is that you want to represent the text. And then you can basically have a custom container that draws that on top of everything else that's happening at the same time. You could also take a view, basically create a view on the fly, or remove that view that you had from the parent that it was in, and then place it in an overlay container, and then animate that. And the way that works is, if you picture layers of containers, let's say you have a frame layout and it has a list view in it which represents the chat content so far, and then at the bottom of it has a edit text. Well, you could actually take a view out from the bottom or create a new view on the fly and place that directly into the frame layout. So you could, let's see, yeah, right. You're taking it out of its container at the bottom, and then you're putting it into the overall container that also contains the list view. And then as that container draws, it can then draw that other child there. right? So you're adding it as a child basically on the top layer of some layout that's at the back, maybe your main content view or whatever. And then you can do whatever you want. You can animate the bounds of that thing. You can animate the translation position or whatever. You can scale it on the fly. Then you can do crossfade tricks. Like once it's in that layout that allows it to lie on top of everything else that's in there, you can do whatever you want with it and then place it in the correct place. The real trick there, though, is, as I said at the beginning of this incredibly long paragraph, figuring out a view that's going to correctly represent that view from the starting position and location and size, and the same thing at the end, so that to the user it actually looks like the same object, even though it probably is not the same object.
Sounds like a lot of sneakiness.
There is a lot of sneakiness in animations in general. Again, as long as it looks good, it's good enough.
Excellent. That's our slogan, isn't it? For DevBytes, as long as it looks good, it's good enough. Follow-up question, which you may have answered in that very long paragraph. So let's say you've got a chat client, and when the chat loads, you see the top of the list to begin with, so the least recent messages. For a moment, and then it jumps down to the bottom. Is there a way to avoid that when you sort of displaying that chat list to begin with? So if you open up the window and it's got the list, and then you want to scroll to the bottom straight away when the activity is loaded.
Yes. So one of the tricks that, if you go back and watch the I/O talk called A Moving Experience, where we did a lot of animation demos, a particular trick, or if I were to be more proper, I would say technique, that you saw in almost every one of the demos that we showed was using pre-draw listeners. And you can use this when an activity launches, basically when an activity launches, we're going to do everything we need to, including layout and figuring out where things are and loading the resources and getting everything ready, and then we're going to draw the activity, right? And when we draw that activity, by definition, everything will be correctly positioned the way that it needs to be. In your case, the way that it needs to be might be, with content actually moved up, animated up or whatever. And so what you can do is set a pre-draw listener so that right before we actually draw the frame, you can go in and change some values so that what we draw is going to be different than what was automatically determined by the default situation. Now maybe there's a better, more correct way to do this with layouts to actually do this correctly, but there's an underlying question here, which is, when is the first time that I can actually get my hands on the bits that are going to display on the screen? And it's that pre-draw listener. Right, so you basically get the view tree observer for any view in the hierarchy, add an on pre-draw listener, put your code in there that's going to do whatever it is, start an animation, move stuff around, do what you need to do in there, and then remember to return true from that so that the draw actually happens. It's a little nuance. If you use an IDE and it auto-generates the boilerplate code, I know Eclipse does this anyway, it automatically says return false. So in your pre-draw listener, you are canceling the draw. Don't do that.
Helpful. So what do you actually get back from the pre-draw listener? So at that point, do you have access to the inflated layout view, or do you have access to the canvas? So like at what level are we looking at?
You have access to everything that's in the view hierarchy, right?
Right.
So if you have loaded, before you create your view tree, your on pre-draw listener, if you've gotten references to things from the layout that you set as your content view, then those references will be valid, and you can query the bounds of those and figure out where things are. Excellent. And shift them around. So a lot of the animations that we showed in that talk at I/O consisted of figuring out where things needed to be, and then setting initial values for those, and then animating them into place. If you want views to slide in or fade in or whatever, because at the time when you get that first callback, everything has its correct bounds and position and orientation, and you can do whatever you want with that information at that time.
All right, so it's a way to sort of preset things. So if this is what you've got there is the right place for them, and you can say, actually, I want it all, like when my activity launches, I want everything to slide into place or pop or fade or whatever else, and so you pre-can it in the reverse direction.
Right. Now, there's a related question that I don't really know how to answer, which is, well, maybe the correct thing for you to do is actually lay things out differently and reposition them. Catching the on pre-draw and sort of setting things up for animations is a slightly different, hackier solution, where you're not actually setting the correct position of these things, which would require actually setting layout params and doing a request layout, and we've already done the first layout, right? So it's a little bit late for you to then come in and say, okay, now at this time I'd like to do this other thing. For that logic, you'd actually want to do that a little bit earlier, maybe in on activity created, on create. On. We have a lot of on methods.
True, we do.
And at that point, you can sort of set up the layout for what you need to be, and that will generate a request layout, and that'll put things in the correct layout position. And maybe then you don't even need the on pre-draw listener. But the on pre-draw is a nice trick when you actually need to figure out, let the system do the real thing, and then tell me what's going on before you put it on the screen.
So it sounds like it's almost a case of figuring out what the most common scenario is. So if you're going to do it every time, then hacking into the on pre-draw listener is probably overkill. You should probably just do it in the layout somehow. Whereas if it's a sort of a one-off or something unusual, then it may be a better approach.
I would say more that if you're going to start hacking things and faking out layout, that you may end up causing artifacts. Like if you say, no, that's not where I wanted it to be, and then you go ahead and you set the left, right, top, bottom position, regardless of what layout, where layout wanted to place those items, then if another layout happens to run in the next frame, your positions will get clobbered by the real layout. So if you actually want to lay out these things at the right place, then figure out the right layout solution, as opposed to the more animated sliding things in situation.
Right. So avoid go-tos in your layout hacks.
Go-to is considered harmful, it turns out.
Go figure. You learn something every day.
Somewhere.
Okay, so this next question, it's about as long a paragraph as your earlier one, so bear with me while I see if I can distill this slightly as I read it through. So we've got someone who's working on an app. So this is Hans Dorfman. He's working on an app, which is a great start. Really important for us. And it's going to animate a box. So some kind, let's say it's a custom action bar, so a box along the top of your activity. In and out while you're scrolling. So like the Google Chrome app does with the URL box. So as you scroll, it's going to make this box appear and disappear. Yep. But the scroll animation contains some kind of sub-animations. So his action bar should change its height on scrolling and also do some additional animations with the child views like icons and text views. So the first question is, how does he implement a height change animation? Is that a scale animation? It doesn't seem to be something like that.
Yeah, changing the bounds of views can be tricky. Because the bounds of objects as well as the real positions of them are determined by the layout. And to get the real, to set the real position and dimensions of a view, you really need to let layout run, because only the layout, especially the nested layout in which that view lives, is going to be able to determine the real information about that view. So I would say in an ideal world, if you want to set the size of an object or animate the size of an object, what you do is change the layout params and then let the layout system figure it out. In the real world in which we live, we have constrained devices that might just fall over if you force them to do layout on every frame in a really complex view hierarchy.
And in fact, that is his follow-up, is he was like, I know how to do this, I'm going to change the layout params height, but...
Oh, this was a follow-on thing?
This was the follow-on, yes. And it turns out that this has some performance implications.
It does have performance implications.
In fact, I know this. Even back in the days where we didn't have such resource-constrained devices, I used to write code for Windows. Big, powerful machines, almost as big CPU power as these phones do now. And I had this really smooth progress bar. So it was a progress bar, but it was indeterminate. And I have a passionate hatred for progress bars which go to the end and then start again from the beginning. So I built my own, and it pulsed. It went in and out, and it changed colors and everything, because you could do that in the .NET canvas. And so I was changing the layout of this object, which was changing colors. Turns out it. Well, no, it was beautiful, because I just took over the UI thread for that, because you want to make it nice and smooth. It turns out it decreased the performance of the underlying activity by a factor of 10. So
animations are that important.
Well, and for me, that was good enough. Because it looks good, it's good enough.
That's right.
So yes, that was his follow-up. So do you have any general ideas, feedback there?
Yeah, most of my answers are, well, it depends on your situation. In this particular case, there's a couple of things that could work. You've already determined that maybe scale is not the answer, and in general, it's not. Scale is really nice for sort of a transient effect where you're popping something out of the screen, or you're animating it in, or you're just giving a little bounce effect or whatever. But as soon as you start scaling things, especially that contain text, they tend to look really awful. So it's really better as a temporary effect than to actually change the size with a scale, especially, you're going to make this thing taller, so you're going to scale in Y. Well, that's just going to stretch out everything vertically. It's going to really look horrible. That's a graphics term, horrible. So what you really want to do is change the real bounds of the object, but then you have this problem to solve where, well, if you animate the layout params, that's really expensive. It's the correct solution, but it's really expensive. What I have done in some situations, including the layout transition class that we talked about earlier, is you can actually animate the bounds of an object. And you can do that by calling setters, or you can set up an object animator to basically animate left, right, top, bottom, just as you can animate the translation properties or the scale or the rotation or anything like that. And you can combine that with the ability to use the on pre-draw listener, which we talked about earlier, to basically run layouts, set the layout params to what you want them to be, and that will cause a request layout. And on the next drawing frame, we will run layout before drawing occurs. So if you add a view tree observer on pre-draw listener, then you're going to get a call after that next layout has run, but before we've displayed it on the screen. And at that point, you can start an animation. This is exactly how layout transition works. You can start an animation that animates the left, right, top, bottom bounds, right? And you can do so in a way that is changing the correct thing. It's not changing the scale, but instead it's actually changing the size of the view. Now, there's a couple of very important nuances to this. One is that the position of items inside of that view or inside of that layout whose bounds here are changing might be in the wrong place because you just told layout to run, which means they may be set by that layout to then pop to their end state. You may need to do something with those, such as animating their relative position inside the layout at the same time. You can also do things like fade text out, resize the thing, fade text in. That can be compelling or effective. Another problem that you're going to run into is that if a real layout runs in the middle of your animation, then you're going to have a bad day because the real layout positions are the ones that you told it you wanted at the end of the animation. So if you said, okay, I want this thing to be this big, we're going to call request layout, layout's going to run, you're going to have your pre-draw listener, you're going to say, okay, now animate from this smaller size up to this larger size. If you're in the middle of that animation and a real layout runs, it will snap very momentarily over one frame to that real end size, and then your animation will continue running. So you're going to see this flicker artifact as it hops over the real values and then continues with the animated values that you have. The workaround for this, again, which layout transition uses and which you can use in your own application, is to have a custom layout and make sure to stub out layout calls or on layout calls during the middle of an animation just so this artifact doesn't happen. It's a bit of a hack, but it's really basically a workaround for the performance situation where you know what you're supposed to do, but you don't have the performance to do that across all devices in all situations.
Nice.
How's that for another very long paragraph?
That was pretty good. I mean, it was a long paragraph question, so you have to match it. That's
word for word.
Part of your contract, right? However many words are in the question, it needs to at least be that many in the answer. We've got a few more questions from the G+ stream. People are shy; they don't want to join us on the Hangout. Fair enough. By all means, keep sending your questions in.
Either.
Yeah, he hates being on camera. It's awkward.
So shy.
Hans Dorfman asks, he's wondering how the Google Play Music app have implemented the parallax scroll view. Is that a translate Y animation? I mean, he can use the on-scroll listener to detect scrolling and then simply set the translate Y of the view to do step-by-step animation. Is that kind of the right way?
Is it okay if I say I haven't a clue? I don't even know the effect he's talking about.
The parallax scrolling in Google Play Music. Just trying to think what that would be. I'm not sure myself. You can say you don't have a clue.
I don't have a clue. Sorry, without picturing it, I can't even give you a pointer to it. So no, I'll have to go back.
We should get someone to show you. I think producer Daniel may have a phone which he can show us on. We'll see how we go.
Yeah, I'm going to check. I'll let you guys know.
All right, awesome. In the meantime, we'll have a look at a question from R. Palin, who says, how do you consistently animate sprites on devices with vastly different processing power? I know that back in my day, there was a button on the front of the computer that said turbo.
Yeah, turbo.
So you could slow it down.
Turbo button.
I don't know if we have that on any of the new devices.
We started removing buttons from devices. I wonder if we got rid of the turbo button.
We must have done, because I don't see it like switching between 8 and 12 gigahertz.
Maybe it's inside the back. You can take the back cover off.
Unsolder one of the processors.
So one thing that we're really good at doing, especially when we went to hardware acceleration where moving bits around on the screen is much faster, is copying bitmaps around. If they're really big bitmaps, and especially if they're like blended on the screen and you're doing a lot of overdraw, then things tend to get expensive. But if you're just simply copying, small sprites around, unless you have thousands of them to copy on every single frame, you're going to get pretty good performance. And this is, at the SDK level, you're just doing a draw bitmap from here to there. If you're not scaling on the fly, actually scaling on the fly is even cheap in the GPU. If the bitmap is not really huge, if you're not applying filters to it, which cause extra processing power and may reduce some of the hardware acceleration effects that we can get, you're going to get pretty good performance anyway. I have seen performance suffer when someone was trying to, they had a bunch of small sprites they were animating, and by a bunch, I mean 3,000. When you get up to that level and you're sort of iterating through this tiny little loop to copy a lot of stuff around, well, the overhead of sending all those commands down can bog down eventually. But if it's just copying sprites around on the screen, GPU is pretty good about that. There's also tools to help figure out whether that's really your bottleneck or whether there's something going on. So you should certainly look into using TraceView, which is an excellent profiling tool. A note about it, though, that it does tend to skew or distort the timings of things that are actually happening at the SDK versus the native level. The overhead of the tool itself tends to make the numbers seem larger for simple things like method calls. But it can at least give you sort of a relative impression of what's going on for performance. Another one is to look at the GPU performance, which you can enable in the developer options. And that will spit out some numbers when you do a dump sys GFX info. And you can put those into a spreadsheet and sort of see where your frame rate's going at what times, and see what exactly is contributing to those frame rate problems. And you can also use the overdraw tool, which will show you, it'll use colors on the screen to sort of show you what's being overdrawn, which means, maybe copying that sprite was really cheap, but you were also copying a window background, and then on top of that, you're copying an opaque background for the application, and then you've got list items overlaying that. And by the time you actually got to drawing the sprite, it was like the 5th or 6th level deep. And we simply ran out of bandwidth in the GPU to draw that many pixels on the screen.
Great. Okay, so here is the parallax view that he's referring to. You'll see that the album art at the top is scrolling at a different speed to the list underneath it.
Okay.
So I guess the question is this an animation, or is this just a simple case of we're tracking the movement of this particular list and modifying the position of each?
I believe so. That's not an animation. They're just saying, okay, how far did the finger move and how far do we want to scroll this list? Because you can scroll a list either directly with the finger or programmatically. I would assume that they're just doing it programmatically based on a scaled down delta value for the scroll position.
Yeah, that makes sense. It is a nice effect, though.
Yeah.
Turns out not everything that looks nice has to be an animation.
What?
It's news to me. I think we've got our last question here from Maxim Golivikin, unless we have any more coming up in the next few minutes. And we've in fact gone over our half-hour allotment.
No songs today.
There will be no singing. Good news for everyone. I get the impression Maxim may have been talking to you before, because he says he would like to pick at Chet's mind once again on view group animations. He'd like to know if you could speak more about techniques that could be used to expand view group height revealing child elements. He's put that in quotes. Feels like either he's asked you that before or you've done a DevByte on it.
Or did he ask the earlier one about view group animations?
Oh, that's quite possible. Let's have a look. I don't recognize the name. I do try and hideously mangle everyone's name. So if so, it was uncredited. But in any case, can you speak more about the techniques that could be used to, quote, expand view group height revealing child elements?
Expand your consciousness. Maybe I'll add a little bit to what I was saying before about actually animating the real bounds. You can imagine a situation where you wanted to expand the view group to include another view that was down here. You could animate the bound. You could force layout to occur. Add the on pre-draw listener. I'm getting really tired of saying that. We need smaller method names in Android. That's really what we need, so that we can talk about them more quickly.
That's what the learning from today's episode really is smaller method names.
I mean, nothing beats there's one its class name, Color Matrix Color Filter. I think if I can just work in color one more time, then the world will explode. Okay, so you have a view group that's this big, it has a bunch of views in there, and then maybe you get another one that you want to add there when the view group gets larger. You could set the layout params, you could add that view down there, or this will expose the view or whatever is happening in the app. And then animate the real bounds, and then, as I said before, once you run layout and that view actually is down there, that will be its real position, and that's where the layout wants to draw it. So as you animate the bounds, then it will simply expose the thing that's already sitting there waiting. I don't know, that's probably too simplistic for your situation, but I don't really know how to answer it
without more detail. No, I think that's a good answer. All right, brilliant. That looks like the last of our questions. We're just over 30 minutes, so that's kind of perfect for today's episode. Thank you very much, Chet, for joining us.
Thank you.
In our first DevBytes Backstage. What do you think of the name, by the way?
DevBytes, fantastic.
Yeah, working for you? I like ChetBytes because you seem to be the only one doing them. But nonetheless, we're going to try and bring in some other people for similar DevBytes Backstage, even if they haven't done a great number of DevBytes for us to talk about. In fact, tomorrow, Roman and Nick from Android Design in Action will be doing a DevBytes Backstage talking about some design elements, and in particular practical UI implementation for Android based on their Google I/O talk from this year. So please,
if you have other backstages based on teams that actually aren't doing DevBytes, you could call them nullbytes.
Nullbytes. Oh,
nullbytes. Yeah,
I like that. I like that a lot.
Right.
So stay tuned for more DevBytes Backstage and nullbytes Backstage. In the meantime, do send us through your questions for Nick and Roman for tomorrow's episode, and do join us, particularly if you aren't feeling shy and would like to join us via Hangout. You can ask them in person. They're a lot less scary and intimidating than chat, so hopefully we'll get a few people to join us that way. In the meantime, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.